What's going on? It's the Mackie Mouse. So it's 2021 and I have a new mantra this year that I am trying to instill in all my social media and all my videos and everything going forward. And that is one up yourself. So it really just means taking what you already know, taking what you already do, or even maybe even something you don't know, and leveling that thing up. If it's from zero and you don't know anything about it, learn about it, just go out there and start doing it. If it's something you already do, then take what you already know and figure out how to take it to that next level and make it better. So towards that goal, I'm trying to make some quick tip videos that are maybe some things that people haven't thought about. If you're a Lightroom user or a Photoshop user, maybe these are some tools that you haven't used before or some techniques you haven't used before. Today, what we're going to be talking about is Lightroom preferences. Not the sexiest of videos. I'm not showing you the way to make your photo look the best or whatever, but today I'm going over the preferences menu in Lightroom to maybe some things that you've never dug into before. Just a way to take the tool you already use and take it to that next level and really start to master this thing maybe you're already comfortable with, but you can, elevate your use of. So let's get into it. So here we are in Lightroom Classic. So all these tips are Lightroom Classic, by the way, not Lightroom CC. So this is the desktop version of Lightroom. And like we said in the intro, what we're going to be talking about is some preferences that might make your life a little bit easier as a photographer. So let's get into it. The preferences are located in the edit menu, edit preferences, or you'd hit Control, comma, or Command, comma. Let me actually make sure that that's yes, Control, comma, or Command, comma. I don't really use that shortcut super often. But you'll see all these tabs at the top. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each tab and just point out some things that you may have missed if you haven't really dug in deep into these preferences. Obviously, we start with General, Language, English. This is probably already set correctly, but there is a setting here, a checkbox to show the splash screen during setup. That's that really pretty piece of artwork when it first shows up. If you don't want that splash screen to show up when you start it and you just want to go directly into Lightroom, you can uncheck that box and that will do that. When you actually start the program, there is a preference here you can load a specific catalog, or you can load the most recent catalog that opened. So that's kind of really handy. This import options section will decide how you bring photos into Lightroom. So like if you have a memory card you stick into your computer, do you want the import dialog in Lightroom to come up right away without you having to go to import? You can check this box for that. Select the current / previous import collection during import. So that basically is telling Lightroom when you actually say, okay, import these photos, Lightroom is automatically going to switch to a new collection that is just what is being imported right now. It's not looking at the collection you're actually putting the photos in. It's just one big scoop of what this latest import is. That's kind of nice just to be able to be like, okay, what was the last thing that I brought in? So it automatically chooses that collection for you. If you don't want that, you can uncheck this box. These like other checkboxes are pretty much self-explanatory. For instance, if you shoot RAW and JPEG at the same time, then treating JPEG files next to RAW files as separate photos. If you check this box, it'll activate that. That means if it's unchecked, as it is by default, RAW photos and JPEG photos of the same photo will just group as one thing. That way, if you took 100 photos, you have 100 JPEGs and 100 RAWs. Instead of having 200 photos with duplicates show up, you'll have 100 instances, but the program automatically knows that those two files are part of the same one group. That's the default. If you want them to actually be treated as a separate thing, then you would check this box. So moving along to presets. Presets is actually very cool, and there's a really, really awesome setting in here that not a lot of people know about. It's called Raw Default Master. So what this means is, when you have your RAW files automatically come in, you can apply certain things to it right away. For instance, you can apply any one of these presets that you have automatically. So if you're the kind of person who puts presets, your same custom preset that you made on everything, you can actually set it to automatically apply that preset to every photo that you import by default. I have a setting, you can do camera settings, which I think is the default, Adobe default, or you can override it with something that you want. One of the coolest things about this is really being able to customize those same things that you do to a photo right away when it comes in, over and over and over again, instead of having to do that manually, having it do it for you. Me, for instance, I choose preset and then defaults. I choose Adobe Vivid plus Lens. What that means is it's automatically going to put the Adobe Vivid color profile on everything, because that's how I edit. All my stuff is very vibrant and with color. So I usually start from the Vivid place, and if it's too much, then I'll take it off. But 9 times out of 10, I always put it on. So instead of having me switch that, I just choose put Vivid on everything when it comes in, and I'll decide if it needs to be removed. And then plus Lens means that Lightroom will read whatever the lens is on my camera, and it'll automatically apply basically a compensation for that lens. So the distortion, the vignetting, it's just an automatic thing that happens, and every lens has a very specific thing that it tells Lightroom to do. It's automatic. So every single photo that comes into my catalog, those are automatically applied without me having to go check them for every single photo. So that's actually a really, really cool handy trick. In terms of visibility, showing partially compatible developed presets. If you're a person who uses presets all the time, depending on whether you're putting the preset on a JPEG versus putting it on a RAW, certain presets only work for certain types of photos. And the reason is because some of the settings that get changed only exist in a RAW, and a JPEG doesn't have that setting. For instance, something like temperature. On a RAW photo, temperature is measured in Kelvin, which is a measurement of warmth of the light. With JPEGs, temperature starts at 0 and then is plus or minus 1, 2 units of warmth or coolness from 0. So those are two different scales. So certain presets that already have that built in, the JPEG presets don't understand Kelvin, and vice versa. So showing partially compatible developed presets allows the program to show you the preset, but it's grayed out to tell you, hey, this preset does not belong on that photo you've selected, but it's still here. I usually like to have that checked on just because it's a little easier to see what you're working with. You can also store presets with certain catalogs. If you're the kind of photographer who likes to separate out per like one shoot per catalog, and you have like, your wedding shoot as one set of presets and your, portraits have another or something like that, you can store specific presets with specific catalogs. That way you don't just have one giant list, if that's how you would like to work. These buttons here show Lightroom develop presets or all other Lightroom presets. If you click those, it'll take you directly to the folder on your computer where those presets exist. That way you can add more presets to the library. This is the quickest way to get there. It's like a shortcut. Lightroom defaults. This is actually just pre-programmed into Lightroom. These are the original defaulted, basically customized things you can change in Lightroom, color labels or text styles or local adjustments when you change all those things. If you get messed up somehow, or you end up deleting original like Lightroom, package default stuff, this is how you would get them back. So this is just to get you out of a jam. External editing is our next tab. So when you're editing in whatever your latest Photoshop version is, Lightroom understands that you'll want to either edit in the native Adobe space, so whatever your most recent Photoshop is, or some external thing. So you can set those separately, and you're basically telling the computer how you want to work. When I go into Photoshop, do I want to work in TIFF or PSD? I will give you a word of warning. By default, the file format for editing in Photoshop is TIFF. I strongly advise against working in TIFF, mostly because while TIFF is a slightly better quality output, it's very slight. It is an enormously larger file. And not very compatible with other things. They don't really play nice with other programs. It also gives you a little blurb here that says PSDs can be less efficient than TIFF in terms of metadata file. Honestly, the practical matter is it doesn't really matter. That less efficiency, you're never going to notice it. PSDs are easier to read. They're easier to use. So switch this to PSD. And then for these other settings, photo RGB, if you like to work in Adobe RGB versus ProPhoto or sRGB specifically, if you don't know what any of these things do, just leave it on Pro RGB and move on. Totally fine. Bit depth, 16 bits. Again, if you specifically want to work in 16 or 8, If you know what you're doing, that's perfectly fine. It's recommended to just leave it at 16 and ProPhoto RGB. If you don't know what these settings are, it's not really that important. You can just leave them, it's fine. But if you do know what these settings are, this is where you'd customize them. For resolution, I would leave it at 150 unless you're going to be printing on billboards. Then you can raise it up to 300, but 150 is the industry standard for photos, basically. In terms of an external editor, if you have something like a Portrait Professional, Portrait Pro program or something like that, and you'd like to send these programs to one of those, you would be able to choose what that application is. For instance, I have Portrait Pro Body and Portrait Pro Studio. Portrait Pro Studio works specifically on the face, and Body works on the body shape and stuff like that. I used to use these many, many years ago when I was first learning how to retouch. So I used to have this basically set to, you'd choose a program, you choose which file formats you want to work in. So like if you want it to be PSD or a TIFF or whatever kind of format, same thing as up here, right? Your resolution, and then you can save it as a preset. So I have an output to, if I want to work on the body of a picture, I will send it to one program. And if I want to work on the face, I'll send it to another program. So you can save these presets for, hey, this is my face, external editor. This is my body external editor. If you say, for instance, have your favorite color editor you want to use that's not Photoshop, this is where you would set that. Stack with original is one of my favorite tricks that Lightroom does. So stack with original means when you send it out to any external program, whether it's an external editor or Photoshop, when the file comes back into Lightroom, Lightroom will automatically stack those two together, meaning it groups them in sort of like a folder, right? You can see behind my preferences a little number 3 here, here's a number 4. That is a stack. So what that is, so this is a stack that's open. These 3 photos are part of one group, and I can close those down. So this actually has 3 photos in it, but it's closed down. You can see this icon, it looks like a little stack of paper, and this one is just a single one. So the Photoshop file, the external edited file, comes in as a stack automatically where it groups the old original and the new edited as one little group together so that you can move them around the space as one unit. Excellent, excellent tip. Make sure that that's definitely on, because that's going to help your organization later for sure. In terms of file naming, you can customize when you're done editing in the external program and you come back into Lightroom, you can customize what that file name looks like. For instance, for me, I think the default is, whatever the name of the original file is. So in this case, it's saying image02. It's going to put a hyphen and then the word edit and then dot whatever the extension of the file is. In our case, it's PSD. So every single file that comes in has -edit on the end. You'll see it here. You'll see it here. In fact, most of these are edit, but you'll see right here, this one does not. So this is an original. This is a Photoshopped edited file. So that's a kind of like nice little way to separate out the names in your Lightroom catalog, and it's automatic. You can also set up a custom template, a custom setting for what that name is. So if when you do black and white, you want to specifically put black and white on the end versus a Photoshop edit, you can customize that to your heart's content. Next, we go to file handling, import DNG creation. If you don't know what a DNG is a digital negative. That basically is the Lightroom version of RAW on steroids, let's call it. So essentially, DNG is a file that has a lot of information in it. If you have ever worked with presets before, then DNG file types are probably not unfamiliar to you, because DNGs are how we keep all of the settings, the Lightroom settings for this picture, and you can pass it from catalog to catalog. So that's why they call it a digital negative, because all of the things you would do in a dark room where you would affect the photo to make it look that specific way. This is kind of like containing all of those settings so that you can pass it from person to person or device to device or whatever. So this is talking about when you create it, do you want the extension to be lowercase, uppercase? Do you want the preview of the JPEG of it to be a certain quality, whatever. So file handling is really something that's not super duper important. This is kind of where, you're telling the program, hey, these things are not okay to put in file names so it doesn't mess with things. This is something that you've probably skipped. But if you have run into some kind of problem with file names or types, you can, look through these and see if this might help fix your problem. For instance, if you, for whatever reason, putting spaces in file names are weird for like your server or whatever, and the spaces all need to be underscores, this is the place where you would do something like that. So this is kind of the nerdy section, not for the average user. Okay, so moving on to interface. This is really literally how you interface with the program. So what it looks like essentially. In terms of, let's see, well, my favorite ones are lights out. So, right. So the screen color, when you turn the lights out, by the way, to turn the lights out, you hit the L button, right? And it reduces, here, I'll show you. If I hit L once, it does like a halfway darken of everything except for the photos. If I hit it again, it'll do completely black, just show the photos. If I hit it again, it restores it, right? So I'm going to hit Control comma so I can get used to that shortcut. So with the lights out, the screen color, what is the color that it goes to when it's in full mode? And then when that half mode happens, what is it? Is that half mode too dark? Then reduce this 80% to something like 50. Or if you don't want it to go all the way to black and you want it to go to, say, a dark gray instead, or even a white, because you're, working with Instagram and the background on Instagram is usually white, this is where you would change the lights out specific setting. In terms of the background, this is the background behind. So if I double click an image, this background here, and the way that you change that background is just right clicking and then changing it like this. So that setting in that background section is basically saying, okay, so this background, the main window is one color. Secondary window is if you have a secondary screen and you have like a copy of this somewhere else, which I'll show you in some other video, but you can have that same background as a different color on the second monitor. So for instance, dark gray on my main monitor, but then I move on a second monitor, I have this same image being portrayed, but with a white background. That way I can see it. What happens if this picture is over dark or over light? I can look at that at the same time. Keyword entry. Make sure that separate keywords using is set to commas. If it's not set to commas and it's set to spaces, you'll see it gives you a little warning here that says you have to put quotes around a keyword that has spaces. So if it's like, Disney World, and that's 2 words. If you don't put quotes around it, then Disney and World will be 2 separate keywords. If you use commas, then you can type a full phrase, like New York Fashion Week, as a whole thing, and then put a comma at the end of it, and it'll understand that New York Fashion Week is one single keyword. So that's really, really helpful. Auto complete text in keyword tags field means if you just start typing New York, it'll automatically put Fashion Week next to it. I think by default that's already checked. Film strip is also very, very, very cool. The film strip, if you don't know, is this area down here. So it's showing you it's basically showing you the grid, this grid, but in one strip down there so that while you're working on a single image, you can still see the entire grid of the library, right? So what the film strip section of the settings is what is included in this film strip. Do you want to show badges, which are these little black things down here? If you uncheck it, then they'll go away. Ignore clicks on badges. These are actually clickable. So this is the insignia for you have put edits on it. Well, if you click this little symbol, it'll actually bring you to the edit page. If you say ignore clicks on badges, when I click that, nothing will happen. So depending on how you like to work down here, if you find yourself accidentally clicking these things and having it do something weird, that would be the way you ignore it. Show photos in Navigator over mouse over, show the tool tips. So like when you just hover over it, does it have a little tip next to it? The index numbers are back there. So just play around with these checkboxes and see what they do. You customize this to how you like it. Like for instance, those stack numbers, you can have those stack numbers just not be there at all, or ratings or whatever. And then last on this page, we have tweaks, zoom, clicked point to center. What that means is when you zoom in, like so, it is going to zoom in on wherever my mouse actually clicked. If that checkbox is unchecked, then it will zoom in no matter where I'm clicking. It'll like randomly zoom in. Oh, that's interesting. It didn't do what I told it to do. Oh, wait. Nope, it's not doing what I'm doing. Well, that's embarrassing. I could cut this part out of the video, but instead I'll just live in my embarrassment here. That's fine. You can ignore this whole section. Tweaks are stupid. That's what we learned here. Okay, so next for the performance tab, this, as it indicates by the name, has to do with your computer working alongside with Lightroom. So use graphics processor. You can tell it auto or you can say custom. So if you have it on auto, it'll just automatically choose whatever your graphics card is. If you put it on custom, you can use the GPU for the display, meaning what Lightroom is physically showing you, but not for the processing, as in it draws the image for you on your monitor, but when it comes time to, make paint strokes and change color and do all those things, it's doing that on your CPU level, not your GPU. If you have problems with your GPU isn't strong enough, maybe you don't have a powerful enough card, or you're working on a small laptop or something, you can not bog the GPU down. If you know how to do this kind of stuff, or you understand the difference between using your CPU versus your GPU, this is where you set those settings. Don't be freaked out if you have no idea what I'm talking about. It's perfectly fine. You are more than welcome to just set this to auto and let the computer do all the work for you. Not a problem at all. But I just wanted you to, anybody who's out there who has built a computer before or kind of knows what these things are, this is where you'd set that. Camera raw cache settings. Your cache is basically, think of it as like a sock drawer for Lightroom to just throw, it needs a place to work, to put random bits of data here and there for calculations that it's doing, etc. So this is the location of where does it just dump those files so that it just has room to mess around and work and give you what you're asking of it. Don't forget every once in a while to go into the preferences and purge this cache out. You can set a maximum size to make sure that it doesn't overload your computer with extra memory, like eating up space, but definitely make sure to go in and purge it yourself, because this cache does not purge itself automatically. So this will actually just wipe that whole folder clean. It's recommended to choose a location of your Lightroom cache that is not the same drive that Lightroom is on, or not the same drive that you're working on. So like an SSD would be ideal, or some other drive. So if you're working from an external hard drive, don't let the cache be on the external, put the cache on your C drive or your Macintosh HD drive. Again, this is something that you're not going to notice right away when you change this setting, but this will help streamline the performance of your Lightroom. You can look up some other videos on optimal cache settings and stuff like that, like how big to make this size. But the takeaway from this is purge your cache every once in a while. Video cache, same thing. You're allowed to put video files in Lightroom, and it has like a buffer cache that it loads. Just purge it every once in a while. Also, by the way, this video cache just goes to the same place that the raw cache is. These are stored together. So wherever you set this, that's also where the video ones are go. Honestly, I don't know that many people who work in video in Lightroom, so that's probably doesn't really matter. In develop, enable hover preview of presets in loop. Very, very handy. So when you're in your develop settings, so if I hit the D key or you click this develop button up here, it's going to yell at me that the file is not found because this picture is stored on an external hard drive. Don't worry too much about that. But for if you go to your presets folder, in fact, I think it's not going to let me put presets on this image because it's not on my machine. So let's go find a picture that is on my machine. Okay, we found a picture that is actually on my hard drive. I'm going to hit D for develop. And now you'll see when I click the presets tab here, it'll populate all the presets that I own. So the cool thing is when you hover over a preset, it will show you what that looks like in the loop. That setting is a checkbox that you can turn on and off, because if this is annoying, or you want it to work like this, or you want it to stop doing this, where you would change that setting is right there in performance in this enable hover preview of presets. So let's see if it doesn't embarrass me this time. Now that I've checked that, when I hover, now you'll see it show up in this preview up here. Thank you for not embarrassing me, Lightroom. I appreciate that. You'll see it in that preview up top, but you won't see it in the actual loop, which, by the way, the loop is just this big giant preview section. So if you like that functionality or you want to turn it off for some reason, that's where you would do it. Using smart previews instead of originals for image editing. This basically makes a tiny preview, like a smaller version of your file, and then you do all your work on that, and then it transfers it to your final output. So while you're editing, the display is going to show you like a lower quality version of your photo, but it will work so much faster. The final output when you actually export it will be full size. So if you're on a small laptop, or Lightroom is really, really chugging, and it's having a hard time working on these giant photos you have, particularly if you have a pro camera, a mirrorless, like an A7R4 that's 64 megapixels, and the file sizes are just enormous, and your computer's having a hard time processing them, you can check this box and it will create a little preview when it's imported, and then you work on the little tiny one, and then your computer doesn't have to work quite so hard. So that might be a little trick if you would like to speed the performance of your computer up. But just understand that you're going to be working in lower quality just while you work, and then the final one will be up-resed. Just one last thing on this performance page, preview generation settings. Generation, not as in like years of life generation, but as in when I generate previews, what are the settings for it? It's asking if you want to generate the previews in parallel. What that means is it's actually making those smart previews as little versions of it. Do you want to create those at the same time as the import, or do you want to force it to do manually? I almost always check this box and make sure that it's constantly creating those previews. If you have a small hard drive, or again, Lightroom and your computer are really chugging, this is one of those checkboxes you can turn off, and that will help increase the performance of your machine because it's not doing this extra work. Maybe you don't even use those smart previews, like who knows? If you don't, and you want to uncheck that, see if that might make your Lightroom a little bit faster. Moving on to Lightroom Sync. This is really great. This is the cloud for your Adobe account. And essentially this allows you to upload from Lightroom Classic, your local desktop version of Lightroom, up to the Adobe Cloud, which can then be pulled down by Lightroom CC, which is the mobile cloud version of Lightroom. So Lightroom Classic and Lightroom CC are two different programs, but they all work from the same metadata in the cloud. So you can transfer stuff between the two. It is a little bit of a tricky process, so I'm going to do a whole separate video on how to sync properly, or a couple of the techniques that people use to organize their syncing. As you can see, I have 43,000, almost 44,000 photos synced because I do all of my syncing from one single catalog. So all my photos that I want transferred back and forth are coming from one place and then being transferred everywhere. So this is a topic for another day, but this is where you would kind of assess some problems and specify where the images go and all that other stuff, but that's for another video. We're going to skip the last one, network, but the last one we're going to really talk about is the display. So if you have multiple displays, so if you have a laptop and you have something connected to it, then those displays will show up here, and they will show up however your system preferences are for the orientation of these monitors, like where they are in relation to each other, for instance, that will show up here. So mine, I have one monitor above, one monitor below, and then one Cintiq tablet display on the side, which is what this one down here is. So the secondary monitor is where remember we talked earlier about where that second window background is? Well, right here in this corner, you'll see number 1 and 2. That's your primary monitor, number 1, and your secondary monitor, number 2. Holding, there's a couple shortcuts to send things to your secondary monitor. The most popular one is Shift E. So if you hit E, that is the loop. That will just show you a blown up image of whatever you were selected. That's what we're looking at now. If you hit Shift E, it will send a loop to the secondary window. That way you can work, say, secondary window on a grid, and then your loop on your main monitor. That way you can see a blown up version of your photo and the grid at the same time on two separate monitors. This preference is saying which one of your monitors is going to be the one where the secondary window gets sent. This is only really important if you have 3 monitors or more, which I have 3 here. So if it goes on the wrong monitor, this is where I would force it to go to the correct one. I don't know that many of you have 3 monitors that you're working with, but maybe if you have a desktop machine, it's pretty popular right now to have a lot of multi-displays. So if you're using Lightroom and you happen to be on a multi-display setup, that's where you would change your settings. And that is my quick overview of Lightroom preferences. I have some other videos in mind that I am very, very excited about, and I have to gush and just like tell you what one of them is right now because I discovered it and it's changed my whole world. Color label set. Apparently, you can change what the color labels are called. So I can make them, they're red, yellow, green, blue, purple, but and you can have different labels for just images, just folders, or just collections. You can have them all be different, and you can set up like a workflow style. So say you're reviewing photos, instead of calling this red, just call it to delete. Then you know that anything red is going to be deleted, or anything yellow is going to be, color correction. Anything green is good. This is super handy, and you can change between those labels for different applications in your photos. So I'm going to go over like how to use that and some different ways to organize things in another video. But I hope you liked this video about the preferences to Lightroom. I know it's kind of it's not the sexiest of tips and tricks, but they're little things that a lot of people kind of glaze over because there's so many words in those preference windows, and they kind of overwhelm people. So I hope that helped you out a little bit in any way. If it did, please let me know in the comments below how it helped out your particular workflow. And if you liked the video, go ahead and hit the like button, and you can subscribe to see the rest of my videos come out. Until next time, see you guys later. Mackie Mouse out.